Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, to this special coverage of Ukraine-Russia conflict as attacks continued in the western Ukraine, not far from the military alliance's broad border in Poland. Finland and Sweden formally applied to join NATO at its headquarters in Brussels on Wednesday, a move that pushed the US President Joe Biden to host the leaders of Finland and Sweden at the White House on Thursday to discuss their application to join NATO, saying that the potential accession of the two Nordic countries is a watershed moment in European security, even though Turkey has so far held up the process. To this point, could Ukraine save the eastern part of the country, or it is to be given up? And could the possibility of Finland and Sweden to join NATO will only push the escalation forward? To answer this question, we have Mr. Don McLean Gill, political analyst in the Pacific region from Philippines, and Mr. Alexei Kubin, PhD of International Relations from Ukraine. Gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, let me read for you this piece of information. Russian authorities said on Wednesday that about 700 more Ukrainian fighters had surrendered in Mariupol, but Kiev remained silent about their fate. On the other hand, Donetsk People's Republic's leaders Denis Pushil said that more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers are still in the besieged Azovstal steelworks. The pro-Russian separatist says that there were around 2,000 fighters at the sprawling industrial complex and just over half remain.
The first option is to raise the white flag and lay down arms. The second option is to die there, just die. They chose the first option. According to our data, there were more than 2,000 people in the Azovstal plant. First, 265 came out, then 617, and then a little more than half of them stayed inside. As for war criminals and nationalists, if they lay down their arms, their fate will be in the hands of the courts.
Mr. Alexei, I'll be starting with you since you are in Ukraine. Based on the given information so far from the eastern part of Ukraine, as well as the north strikes, the northern part yesterday, what is the fate of the Ukrainian soldiers in the hands of Russian troops in Mariupol, and could the eastern part be saved?
No, now it's a question of the negotiate by the Vladimir Zelensky Ukrainian team and with the international military with international organizations and with Russia. For the Ukrainian president, it's very sensitive question about the saved lives of the Ukrainian military from the Azovstal. But you know, in Ukrainian society now we have different speculation, and maybe different speculation in the Russian, because in my opinion, in Russia presents the situation that it's some winner of the Russian or something else, but in my opinion, it's some propaganda for the internal people in Russia. Last situation about the military of the Azovstal, it's a question of the negotiate with the Ukrainian president, with the international community, and with the Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm. Quite understanding, Mr.
You know, maybe in future we will have some exchange. These people to the people from the Russian arms from the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Quite understood, Mr. McLean. What is your interpretation to the chronological order of the events recently? I mean, what is to be expected in the coming days from both sides, Russia as well as the West?
Thank you so much for your question, and thank you for having me. Well, we have to understand the picture is still very grim as an overview, and it'll really be hard to pinpoint the possible end of the tunnel from this particular instance. I applaud, of course, the nationalism and the strong will and determination of the Ukrainians to push back against the Russian invasion, but a solid and long-lasting solution still seems out of light. Given, of course, the internal and external constraints, and of course the complexities in it revolving around the possibility of discussions and negotiations. As both sides are hardwired with their particular objectives, Ukraine is steadfast in effectively securing, of course, its sovereignty and territorial integrity against an oppressor who disregards its right to exist, while the Russian government, of course, will need to prove to its people that it is making significant gains to avoid, of course, public discontent at home. So casualties continue in both sides, though it is arduous to verify on the exact numbers, but we can definitely see casualties on both sides. And as morale fluctuates, the drastic measures that will be taken may create further humanitarian instability. So we do hope that negotiations become effective soon to be able to create a stable atmosphere for the people.
Understood. Mr. McLean, just staying with you, how can you read Putin's speech in the Russia's Victory Day? He said that this year's parade represents another victory for our nation and for our ancestors, in other words, USSR. In your analysis, is he looking to bring back the Soviet Union?
Well, we get that speculation a lot, considering that it has become a trending topic in commentaries, but we have to really look at it objectively. In fact, right now we can see that Russia has been incurring significant losses economically, militarily, and of course in terms of its normative capabilities as well. Diplomatically, its networks are also strained. So I do not think that it is quite feasible rationally to really try to materially retrieve that former Soviet past, because primarily it is arduous to sustain that ambition materially, in which Russia is now considerably constrained with. So I do not think that it has the capacity to really expand its borders to that extent, like the Soviet Union. But of course, these are statements that are used to fuel, of course, the national sentiments at home. But these do not really correlate to the realities on the ground.
Understood. Now, moving on to the second point of our discussion, National Security Advisor to President Joe Biden said on Wednesday that the United States is confident that Sweden and Finland will have an effective procedure for joining NATO, and Turkey's concerns can be addressed.
We're confident that at the end of the day, Finland and Sweden will have an effective and efficient accession process, that Turkey's concerns can be addressed. Finland and Sweden are working directly with Turkey to do this, but we're also talking to the Turks to try to help facilitate. The United States is prepared to send a very clear message, as are all of our European allies, that we will not tolerate any aggression against Finland or Sweden during this process.
The United States strongly supports Sweden's application for NATO membership. Our two militaries routinely exercise together. Your capabilities are modern, relevant, and significant. And your addition to the alliance will make us all better at defending ourselves.
Mr. Alexei, you are a European, so this question is directly for you. Don't you think that there is a sort of two-faced challenge between the NATO leaders? In other words, some of them are trying to escalate the war, such as UK, Germany, whom they keep calling all the countries to join the alliance. And on the other hand, Turkey and to some extent France are looking to have the peaceful resolution close to the table.
No, Turkey, it's very important negotiate between Ukraine and with Russia. In past, Istanbul was the place for this negotiate. But in this situation, in my opinion, Turkey play own game. Because now Turkey want to receive some pluses, benefits from the situation of the joining new membership, to new member, Finland or Sweden, to the NATO. Turkey now in this negotiate, Turkey negotiate about some requirements for these two countries, and in my opinion, these situations not in a direct way connects with the situation in Ukraine, Ukrainian process, but from the Ukrainian side, it's very interesting situation because now we've seen that this easy way for these two northern European countries, but not easy way, for example, for the Ukrainian according to the NATO. Yes, in Ukraine we have different position, and some opposition leader, for example, Yuri Boyko, talking that we need referendum, and after referendum maybe NATO or something else. But Ukrainian, after the invasion and before the invasion, Ukrainian talking that NATO, Ukraine will be much close to the NATO for the weapons and so on. But it's a different relation, to wanted to from the northern European countries and for the Ukrainian wishes. It's very, as for me, it's very interesting, and it's very clear that, and from another side, a very interesting relation to this from the Moscow, because I mentioned that from the Moscow position, joining Ukraine to the NATO, it was one of the cow's belly. From
Mr. Alexei, I'm sorry to cut your train of thought. Mr. Alexei, I'm sorry to cut your train of thought, but in the same context, a way of joining NATO membership. The French President Emmanuel Macron said it will take decades for Ukraine to be accepted into the European Union. How can you consider this contradiction? EU is trying to help Ukraine at the same time they are refusing Ukraine to be joined. This refusal based on what, Mr. Alexei?
As for me, yes, it's very contradictional position from the French president. Maybe if this position connects with some points of the French, maybe German leaders, that Ukraine not need join to EU directly now. But it's, in my opinion, it's a wrong position. Because it's only continuous conflict, and because Ukraine in this situation in the shadow zone, between EU and between Russia, and it's one of the cause for the some future escalations. But maybe it connects with some fears of the European leaders about the new role of Ukraine in the after the join to the European Union.
Understood. Mr. McLean, how can you consider this move from Finland and Sweden? Is this decision comes to the scene only when Russia launched its military operation over Ukraine, or it was an already plan made before that? And why Turkey is objecting their membership?
Right, these are two very important questions that we really need to look into. We have to understand historically, Finland and Sweden have been engaging quite effectively with NATO to the extent of being de facto members for the longest time in terms of military exercises in the area. And this application was in fact expected, and to the point particularly that the guarantees have been made by the UK, by the Nordic states and the United States to safeguard that vulnerable 1 year period between application and full acceptance in the alliance is seen to be something that has been quite consistent among the Western Europeans, among the United States, the UK for that matter. So that has been widely accepted. With regards to Turkey, of course, I do not think that this is something that is of permanent derailment to the plan of Finland and Sweden, but it may significantly delay, and I consider it to be more of a bargaining strategy from Turkey's side. So Turkey, and to a lesser extent Hungary, their skepticism really stems from their disappointment of being ostracized by major European states and the US, and how the West that undermines their interests, sensitivities, and domestic affairs. So when President Biden did not invite both of them to the landmark Summit for Democracy, the sanctions on S-400 towards Turkey, suspension of the F-35 deals, and Finland and Sweden harboring members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, all these things are seen to be problematic towards the sensitivities of both states. But however, I do not think, again, that it is a permanent obstacle. I think that they are opening ways for negotiations that would be in their favor, and then I believe that this may be overcome. But again, it is a delay nonetheless. If time is of the essence, then this is a problem. But I don't think it's a permanent problem to begin with.
Thank you so much for this really important clarification, Mr. Don McLean. Speaking at a meeting dedicated to the oil sector, Russian President Vladimir Putin stressed that Russia will have to reorganize its energy sector in the face of European sanctions.
The rejection of the Russian energy resources means that systematically, in a long-term perspective, Europe becomes the region with the highest cost of energy resources in the world. The exchanges in the oil market are tectonic in nature, and it is, of course, unlikely that we will be able to do business again as before according to the old model. Under the new conditions, it is important not only to extract the oil, but also to build the whole chain up to the final consumer. At the same time, the state will, as before, do everything in its power to create the conditions for the changing of business model, for companies to improve logistics, to provide a system of payment in national currency.
Mr. Alexei, Hungary was the first country that responded to Putin's call to pay by ruble. Yet, the sanctions imposed on Russia destroyed the basis of its economy. And now, Bulgaria is threatening not to support the new set of sanctions. So, as a European, do you think this sanctions policy is really going to bring a way out for Ukraine by sacrificing other countries? If so, will you accept this?
No, for Ukrainians, this sanction is important because from the Ukrainian view, by the Vladimir Zelensky, Ukrainian president, and another authorities, the much more sanctioned. It's some cut of the this money paid and to the Russian, and this connects with the Russian army because. Money from the energy sector, it's the money for the army, from the Russian army. And from the Ukrainian position, sanction is very important way, in the about the oil or gas. But if we look at the European Union, and yes, some countries, some skeptical about the six package of the sanction, and especially in the question of the oil, this is Hungary, yes, and maybe some ruling cycles from the Germany, who did not want the sanctions because they connect to the Russian energy sector. But in my opinion, for the European Union, this question important because war on the European continent, near the European borders. It's not in the different or in the long distance from the European Union. But yes, we have some contradictions in European Union now about the sanction in the energy sector, because many people from the European institutions, some European countries, for example, Hungary and another, connects with this Russian money and connects with this Russian energy streams and so on.
Understood. Mr. McLean, in the same context, previously I have talked to Mr. Hussein Askar, who is a member of the Belt and Road Initiative. He told me that the sanctions imposed on Russia is a suicidal policy that will harm European countries more than Russia itself. Do you agree with that?
Well, of course, there's a lot of merit to that particular statement. As we can see, energy resources would be the jugular vein for both Russia and European states. As we can see now, there's an ongoing scramble for natural gas from other producers as competition will further raise the already high prices given the nearing winter. In fact, as we can see, Italy has announced new supplies from Algeria, Germany from Qatar. But again, these deals are ideal for long-term sustainability, but their impact on the incoming winter and the incoming supplies for the short term are quite limited in terms of its significance. We can see that there's a huge dependency from Europe towards Russia in terms of energy resources. I think this has been quite emphasized enough. And the fact that, of course, sharing reserves as well would also be problematic during this particular time, winter, because of the differing capabilities of the states. And in fact, as we all know, in fact, the natural gas trader, Mr. Bill Perkins, said that it's hard to see how the market balances running out of gas. And in fact, if Russia decides to shut off the gas and oil for that matter during winter, Europe is going to have a significantly hard time balancing its energy security and economy. Though the amount of resources currently are sufficient, but we have to look into the long term. How about next winter, next year? And how about other shocks in the system beyond this particular war? Will Europe be able to amass a significant amount of resources for its development, for its people? I think these are the things that we have to think about, the short term and the long term. It will definitely be problematic given, of course, the asymmetric capabilities of the states towards energy. So definitely this is not a one-night thing solution. It's going to be very difficult for a number of major European states.
Understood. Now, moving on to probably the last point we're going to discuss. Moscow has kicked out diplomats from France, Italy, and Spain in a retaliation for the expulsion of Russian diplomats from European countries as part of the joint action in response to Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry said in a statement on Wednesday that it was expelling 34 employees of French diplomatic missions in Russia and gave them 2 weeks to leave the country. Moscow made the announcement after summoning France's ambassador to Russia, Pierre Levy, and telling him that the expulsion of 41 employees of Russian diplomatic missions was a provocative and founded decision, the statement said. Mr. Oleksiy, coming back to you, don't you think that the recent events, NATO new membership, Russia expelled diplomats, new ways of sanctions, some countries refuse this new set of sanctions, will only lead to escalating the war, and Ukraine is being sacrificed so far as long as this operation continues?
No, in some aspects I agree with you, because in my opinion, now we have some problems here in the diplomatic way to resolve this conflict, this war, because maybe it's clear position maybe from the Moscow. They did not want to go some Ukrainian proposals, because from Ukrainian position, from the president calling some about the direct action meeting between Ukrainian president and Russian president, but from the Kremlin, we hear only some questions that we need a new circumstance for this and so on. But yes, now in Europe we have problems with, in Ukrainian case, some problems with diplomatic way. Yeah, and this diplomacy wars between Russia and Western countries, it's some sign of the escalating situation, in the situation of the continuing war, and maybe different sides did not want diplomacy because they think in the military terms, they won't demonstrate some achievements in the military way. But it's very dangerous, because in my opinion, from the European country, they will do much more in diplomatic way than now we're seeing from the French president or from the Germany.
Understood. Mr. McLean, after this new pack of sanctions, do you still think that Russia will come over all Ukraine again, or the main focus will be only on the eastern part of the country?
Absolutely. We have to understand that, as we have discussed earlier, that Russia is significantly constrained despite the gains that it has received in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. It's still unavoidable to focus on the losses that it has incurred. And this is something that no one can deny, really. And in fact, though the sanctions also come into play, other factors, internal and external, also continue to impact Russia's ability to significantly maneuver based on its particular interests and ambitions. So I do not think there would be an effective strategy to really take up the territory and expand further, because as we all know, it is significantly bogged down. But we can definitely anticipate more of a more significant and, of course, a more catastrophic response, a stronger response from Russia towards whatever areas that it is holding up right now. But I don't think it would be as advisable to think that it would be willing to expand, knowing, of course, being a rational state, that it would also incur significant losses on its side. And of course, domestic support is also necessary. So everything has to be weighed up.
Quite understood. A couple of minutes left, so we will shed light on the last information. According to one of the US experts, there is a serious possibility that North Korea could launch a new missile or conduct a nuclear test during Biden's trip to Asia. On the eve of the US president's long-awaited diplomatic trip of the area, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated that they are prepared for all cases, including such provocation during the Biden administration to South Korea or Japan.
We've said from this podium, we've said at the State Department, and we've indicated in quite clear terms that our intelligence does reflect the genuine possibility that there will be either a further missile test, including long-range missile test, or a nuclear test, or frankly both, in the days leading into, on, or after the president's trip to the region. We are preparing for all contingencies.
Since this visit will occur in Asia, Mr. McLean, White House Security Advisor Sullivan Jake is saying that we are prepared to all cases. What that's supposed to mean? Is he threatening North Korea? What if Kim Jong launches a new missile test when Biden arrives to South Korea?
Right, thank you. So very briefly, we have to look beyond that particular statement. We have to understand that this will be President Biden's first official trip to Asia. Biden met with ASEAN leaders a few days ago in the US as well. So this comes at a time when countries in the continent continue to express a growing ambivalence towards US leadership, given the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan and its preoccupation away from Asia. So the US statements indicate that it has not forgotten about Asia and seeks to solidify its alliance network there with South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, etc. So against particularly belligerent and assertive states that seek to revise the rules-based order. So these statements, the first trip, comes at a very critical time, of course, to improve the U.S. image in Asia. So these are the things that we will expect to significantly improve the network in Asia. But again, we have to look into the consistency after that.
Quite interesting. Mr. Oleksiy, what are you saying about this? What is your comment over this situation?
As for me, the situation seeming that from the U.S. position, they relocated from the accent on the Ukrainian and European affairs to the Asia, to the Asian affairs, and maybe from the Ukrainian position, it's not a good, because now United States want much more stress on the Asia question, about the China question, and so on. But after the few months stressed on the Ukrainian, now we've seen some relocated of the U.S. position.
Understood. With this point, we reach the end of our show. Mr. Oleksiy from Ukraine, Mr. McLean from Philippines, thank you so much for being with us in the show. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we put an end for our special coverage today. And for tomorrow, we have another one. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a blessed evening.